The mountain air was supposed to bring peace. When the old pickup truck rolled to a stop in the clearing, the scene should have been tranquil. A weathered cabin surrounded by pines, two loyal dogs jumping out to stretch their legs. But towering beside that humble cabin was something that shattered the illusion of safety. A decaying wooden watchtower, leaning against the sky, like a sentinel from another age. Its presence was unsettling, as if it had been built not for scenery but to stand guard against an enemy no one dared to name. This is where we meet Jonas Keene, a former soldier who has carried the weight of too many battles. With him are Atlas, a disciplined German shepherd with a steady gaze, and Luna, a restless husky, whose sharp instincts never failed to catch the slightest shift in the wind. To outsiders, they might look like a man and his pets, searching for a fresh start. But to Jonas, these dogs are more than companions. They are his lifeline, his partners, his family. As Jonas steps closer, the contradictions grow sharper. The cabin's logs may be old, but the doorframe hides steel reinforcements. The windows glint like reinforced glass, far stronger than any simple homestead would require. This is not the home of a man seeking solitude. It is the stronghold of someone who prepared for trouble, who built defenses against a war that may never have ended. And that is the heart of today's story. Jonas has not inherited a peaceful refuge. He has inherited a mystery, and perhaps a fight, that has been waiting for him all along. So join us. Today we follow Jonas, Keene, Atlas, and Luna into the shadows of that forgotten watchtower. A secret war is about to resurface, and it begins here. Please support us by subscribing to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. I had told myself 100 times that leaving the city behind would be easy. The truth was nothing about it felt simple. Every corner of that restless place carried the echoes of battles I never wanted to fight again. Sirens that jolted me like incoming mortar rounds, alley shadows that stretched like enemy lines. The constant pressure of people moving too close, too fast. Atlas and Luna endured it, with me two anchors in the storm. But I knew as well as they did that the city had never been our home. It was only a cage, and every day the bars grew tighter around my chest. When the letter arrived, stamped in formality, carrying a name from my family's buried past, I didn't hesitate. I didn't know what waited for me in the wilderness, but I knew what I was leaving behind. I packed with a soldier's efficiency, though the contents of my life barely filled the bed of my truck. Old uniforms folded beside flannel shirts, a worn-out jacket with more holes than fabric, a few tools I trusted to keep me alive. Atlas circled the truck 3 times before leaping into the passenger seat, his posture regal, as if claiming command. Luna hopped in next, pressing her cold nose to the window tail, swishing with a restless excitement that was so utterly her. I took one last look at the concrete towers rising like skeletons against the gray morning sky, then turned the key. The engine coughed, roared, and carried us away. The first miles bled into each other. The city thinned, replaced by flat highways, and the hollow sprawl of suburbs that never felt like they belonged to anyone. Atlas pressed his head against my shoulder every time a siren wailed from behind us, as if reminding me it was only sound, not war. Luna stuck her head out the window, her fur whipping in the wind, howling at the open road with a joy I hadn't felt in years. Their balance between calm and wild steadied me more than I cared to admit. The farther we drove, the more the weight of the past seemed to slide off my shoulders. Concrete gave way to fields, fields to rolling hills, and soon the horizon opened into the endless expanse of the heartland. Sky stretched wider than I remembered blue, so clean it almost hurt to look at. For the first time in a long while, my lungs filled with air that didn't taste like exhaust or fear. I gripped the wheel knuckles, loosening with each mile. But no matter how far we drove, the unease from that watchtower in my mind would not leave me. I hadn't even seen it yet, only the image left by the lawyer's words. By the way, his eyes flickered when he handed me the key and the journal. It was supposed to be land, a cabin, a relic of a great uncle I barely knew, yet I couldn't shake the sense that I was being summoned, not gifted. A call to arms disguised as an inheritance. At night, I pulled the truck into quiet rest stops, where semis lined up like steel beasts. Atlas would curl on the seat beside me, ears twitching at every sound, while Luna prowled the small lot restless until she circled back to my side. I lay awake with the envelope under my head, the journal unopened, the key heavy in my pocket. Sleep came in fragments, haunted, not by the war overseas, but by the thought of a war waiting in the mountains. Days blurred as we pressed north and west, the land changing with each passing hour. Golden fields of wheat gave way to pine forests, and soon the mountains began to rise in jagged silhouettes against the sky. Their peaks were dusted, with the first traces of snow, sharp and unyielding like the edge of a blade. Luna whined when we entered their shadow, as though she could sense the shift, while Atlas leaned forward, nose testing the air, silent but alert. I muttered that it was only mountains, only trees, but I knew better. The air itself seemed different here, heavier, charged with something that pressed against the skin. When we reached the small Montana town listed in the letter, it felt more like a memory than a place. One main street, lined with brick storefronts, faded paint peeling from signs that had outlived their owners. The lawyer's office was tucked between a hardware store and a diner, its windows dusty, but clean enough to reflect the three of us as we approached. For a moment, I saw myself the way strangers might a man too old for his years, flanked by two shadows in fur, one watchful, one restless, a soldier without a war, or perhaps I thought, a soldier being guided toward his next one. The lawyer had been kind enough, though his eyes lingered on me, as though trying to measure whether I was built for what had been left behind. His words were plain: the property, the cabin, the land, all mine. But when he slid the key and journal across the desk, his hands trembled, just enough for me to notice. I asked him if my uncle had lived alone. He said yes, but too quickly. I asked if there were neighbors. He shook his head, then added that the land was remote, very remote, as if that explained everything. When I stepped back outside, Atlas and Luna waiting at my truck, I knew the decision had already been made. There was no turning back. Not after the miles we had driven, not after the restless way my chest ached for something beyond survival. I opened the journal only for a page, and saw handwriting too precise, too measured, like the notes of a man who counted everything because he trusted nothing. I shut it before the words could sink into me. I wasn't ready, not yet. We left the town behind, within the hour, the truck groaning as the road narrowed from asphalt to gravel, gravel to dirt. Pines closed in on either side, tall and dark, their tops whispering in a language I couldn't understand. Atlas sat tall, gaze fixed ahead, while Luna paced the length of the seat, unsettled by the shadows that seemed to stretch too long. The sun sank low, bleeding red against the peaks, and the air grew colder, sharper, filled with the scent of pine and earth. I should have felt relief. This was what I had wanted: distance from the noise, from the city, from the endless reminders of who I used to be. Instead, each turn of the road wound the knot in my stomach tighter. The cabin waited somewhere ahead, and with it, the Watchtower. I could feel it like a weight, pulling me forward, a destiny I hadn't asked for but could no longer refuse. When we crested the last ridge, and the clearing opened before us, silence fell in the truck. There it was, the cabin hunched low and gray, its roof sagging like tired shoulders, its chimney pointing like a finger toward the sky. And beside it, rising from the earth, like a scar, the tower. Wooden, weather-beaten, leaning just slightly, as though it had stood too long but unbroken. It loomed over the trees, a lone sentinel guarding nothing or guarding everything. Atlas growled low and steady, his amber eyes locked on the structure. Luna whined, shifting from paw to paw, tail stiff with unease. I gripped the wheel tighter, staring at the tower until my knuckles went white. This was it. The journey had carried us here, to this forgotten corner of the mountains, to this place where the past refused to die. I shut off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft panting of the dogs. I stepped out, boots crunching on pine needles, air sharp in my lungs. Atlas circled once, planting himself at my side, unflinching. Luna darted ahead, then back, her energy electric, unable to decide if she should explore or retreat. The Watchtower stood above us, unmoving, its presence more alive than any human welcome. I felt it in my bones. This was not refuge. This was not peace. This was the threshold of something else entirely. A summons, a warning, perhaps even a battlefield waiting to be claimed. And as the shadows of the mountains stretched long across the clearing, I realized the journey was not over. It had only just begun. I stood in that clearing for longer than I should have, staring at the two shapes that marked the end of my journey, the sagging cabin and the towering skeleton beside it. Atlas didn't move, his steady gaze fixed on the tower, as if daring it to reveal its secrets. Luna paced and circled restless, her paws leaving faint prints in the carpet of needles. I had thought I was coming to claim land, maybe an old shack and some half-forgotten woods. But as the sun bled into the horizon, it was clear that this was something else entirely. The first step toward the cabin felt heavier than any march I had taken in uniform. The ground was soft with moss and damp earth, yet each crunch beneath my boots echoed like a warning. The logs were darkened by age-weathered silver gray, but when I reached the door, the illusion of frailty broke apart. I pressed my hand against the frame. It was thicker than it needed to be. Solid oak, reinforced with steel hidden beneath the wood. The grain of the timber was scarred in ways no storm could have caused. This wasn't a simple door to keep out the wind. It was a barrier, meant to withstand an assault. Atlas sniffed at the threshold, his nose brushing along the faint outline of a recessed steel bar running across the inside of the frame. He gave a low growl, as if confirming what I already suspected. This was no cabin for a recluse. This was a fortress disguised as a homestead. Luna whined, her tail tucked for a moment, before she darted to the nearest window, paws against the sill. I followed her gaze. The glass wasn't rippled with age the way old panes should be. It was thick, smooth, and tinted faintly. Bulletproof, or close enough. I had seen glass like this on armored vehicles overseas. Seeing it on a forgotten cabin in the Montana wilderness sent a chill down my spine. I slid the heavy key into the lock, my fingers trembling, though I tried to steady them. The tumblers moved with a deep metallic clunk, the kind of sound that speaks of precision and power, not some rusty lock left to rot. When the door opened, it did so smoothly, almost silently, as though it had been maintained with care, right up until the last moment. Dust motes swirled in the fading light, and the air inside smelled of wood smoke, long gone cold. The cabin was one room, simple at first glance: a bed against the far wall, a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchenette with a hand pump and a wood-burning stove. But again, the illusion cracked. The windows were all reinforced, the brackets along the door polished, and waiting for the steel bar to slide into place. The hearth was oversized, not for comfort, but for heating a large space quickly in deep winter. Even the table legs had been shaved and reinforced with steel bolts. I had seen outposts built with less thought for survival. I set my pack down on the table, its weight thudding into the silence. Atlas padded in first, circling once, before laying down, his amber eyes fixed on the door. Luna bounded from corner to corner, sniffing, pawing at the blankets folded neatly on the bed. She sneezed when the dust rose, then turned to me as if asking if this place was truly meant for us. I had no answer. I lit a lantern I found hanging by the fireplace, its fuel still fresh enough to catch quickly. Golden light filled the room, and with it came shadows, stretching tall across the log walls. The journal I'd been given sat heavy in my pack. I didn't open it yet. Instead, my eyes kept drifting to the tower through the narrow windows. It loomed over the cabin like a dark guardian, its wooden ribs cutting against the night sky. It wasn't for stargazing, not for scenery, not for anything that belonged to a quiet life. It had been built to watch, to warn, to stand against something that approached from the trees. When I finally moved to the fireplace, I saw another detail. Along the mantel, hidden beneath a layer of dust, lay a set of notches carved into the wood. They weren't random. They were tally marks, dozens of them lined up in careful rows. The hand that made them had been steady, disciplined. They looked like records, the kind I'd seen on the walls of forward bases, counting days of watch, or encounters, or enemies. My throat tightened. This cabin wasn't abandoned. It was abandoned mid-duty. Atlas rose, padded to my side, his nose nudging my arm. His weight grounded me, but his posture was tense, ears forward, tail stiff. He felt it too. Luna returned from her exploration whining softly, then pressed herself against my leg, both of them different, as they were mirrored the unease pounding in my chest. I told myself to breathe, to catalog the space like I used to, entraining 4 walls, 3 reinforced windows, 1 fortified door, 1 fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a bed, a stove. Defensive advantages, good sightlines, steel bar on door, glass resistant to small arms. Weaknesses, roof sagging chimney, vulnerable back wall, pressed too close to the tree line. It was the kind of mental math you make when you're preparing to hold, not to live. On the table beneath a thin layer of dust, I found a set of metal brackets bolted directly into the wood. They were designed to hold maps or documents in place. The air was thick, with a silence too intentional. The kind that spoke of preparation, not neglect. Whoever had left this cabin had done so ready for someone else to arrive. Ready for me. Night settled quickly. The mountains swallowed the light, and soon only the lantern's glow pushed back the dark. Outside, the tower stood as a black silhouette, its presence pressing against the windows. I tried to shake the thought that eyes once stared from its height, scanning the tree line for threats. I failed. I sat on the bed, the blanket folded with military precision. The smell of cedar and old wool clung to it. My uncle, or whatever he had become, had lived here with purpose. Not to rest, not to hide, to guard. Atlas shifted at the door, ears twitching to sounds I couldn't hear. Luna crawled onto the bed beside me, curling tight her warmth, a reminder of the bond that had carried us through worse nights than this. Yet, the stillness pressed down harder than any firefight ever had. I could almost hear the echo of boots, pacing of pens scratching in a logbook of breaths held as shadows moved in the forest. The more I explored, the clearer it became. I hadn't inherited a peaceful retreat. I had stepped into a station left behind by a man who expected the fight to continue after his death. The cabin was not shelter, it was a forward base. The Watchtower was not a relic, it was an order to keep watch. Every bolt, every bar, every reinforced wall whispered the same truth. This land was not meant to give me rest. It was meant to prepare me for war. I leaned against the table, journal in hand, at last the lantern casting its glow across the leather cover. My hands trembled as I opened to the first page, though part of me wanted to slam it shut again. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. The first words were not of peace. They were of silence in the woods, of paths too straight to be natural, of lights moving without sound. I read only a few lines before I closed it, pressing the leather shut with a force that made Luna lift her head. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I stepped to the window. The forest stretched black and endless branches swaying in the night wind. The tower stood tall, its outline a darker shadow against the sky. My reflection in the glass was pale, eyes hollow. But when Atlas joined me, pressing his muzzle against the pane, I realized something had changed. I wasn't just an intruder here. I was the next in line. The city had been chaos, suffocating noise without meaning. Here the silence was different. It was deliberate, weighted. It pressed into my bones with a message I couldn't ignore. This inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a warning. And as I stood there with my 2 companions at my side, staring out into the dark woods, I understood. The fight wasn't over. It had only shifted to a new front, a new battlefield hidden in the mountains. And I had just been drafted into it. The first nights in the cabin taught me how quickly silence can turn from comfort into suspicion. At dawn, when the mist clung low across the tree line, it almost felt like the world was offering me a chance to start over. The air was sharper than anything I had breathed in the city, the kind of cold that wakes every nerve in your skin. Atlas would patrol the clearing with a soldier's disciplined head, low eyes scanning, while Luna bounded through the frost, chasing scents that led nowhere. Together we walked the perimeter every morning, and for a time it gave me a strange sense of order, like I'd traded missions overseas for missions at home. I filled my days with work. The roof sagged in places, shingles rotted. So I spent hours tearing off what was ruined and replacing it with cedar planks from the shed. The axe became my rhythm, the thud of steel into wood, the crack and split, the stacking of logs against the wall. Each swing carried more than labor, it stripped away the restless hum inside my chest. Luna would return from her sprints through the woods, tongue lolling, fur dusted with leaves, and collapse in the shade as if satisfied with her contribution. Atlas stayed close, never letting his eyes drift far from me, always listening. In those moments I convinced myself we'd found a kind of balance. But peace, I was beginning to realize, never came without shadows trailing close behind. At first it was small things, the sort anyone might dismiss. A branch snapped deep in the woods at night. Atlas would lift his head from the floorboards, ears pricked, growling low, until I pressed a hand against his side. He would settle but never fully relax, and I knew better than to ignore him. Luna, usually restless and eager to play, began to freeze mid-step, sometimes her eyes tracking something I couldn't see. She'd let out a single sharp bark, tail stiff, then bolt back toward the cabin as though chased. One evening, as I carried a bucket from the creek back to the cabin, I noticed the trail was different. Pine needles had been brushed aside, leaving a line too neat, too purposeful. At first I told myself it was just a deer or elk, but deer don't walk in perfectly straight lines. I crouched, fingertips brushing the soil. There was weight pressed into the earth, faint but unmistakable. A human footprint, distorted by rain, larger than my own boot. I stayed there longer than I should have, staring until Atlas nudged me from behind his growl, rumbling like distant thunder. Nights grew heavier with unease. I lay awake, listening to the wind through the pines, telling myself every sound was natural, that the forest was alive and always speaking. But then the forest fell silent. There were nights when the crickets stopped, when even the owls seemed to hold their breath. That kind of silence isn't peace, it's a warning. The kind I remembered from patrols overseas, when villages went quiet right before the ambush began. Each time it happened here, the hair on the back of my neck stood stiff, and Atlas would stand at the door, body rigid, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Luna would pace the cabin whining, then press herself against my leg as if begging me not to open the door. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was hunters passing through early in the season. Maybe a lost hiker wandering off the marked trails. But hunters don't move without light. Hikers don't circle cabins at night. My uncle had turned his home into a fortress for a reason, and each night I felt closer to understanding why. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the base of the tower, Luna darted ahead and began barking furiously at a spot by the roots of an ancient pine. Atlas joined her, his growl, steady teeth bared at nothing I could see. I pulled them back, shushed them. But when I knelt in the dirt, I saw it again. Disturbance in the soil, deliberate digging that hadn't come from an animal. Whoever had been here had tried to bury something or uncover it. I covered it back, marking the spot with a rock, telling myself I'd return later. But the unease stayed with me long after we walked away. The cabin itself began to feel less like a home and more like a post I had been assigned to. Every routine I built only emphasized how watchful I had to remain. I bolted the steel bar across the door at night, checked the latches on every window, kept the rifle propped within reach. When I stepped outside, I found myself scanning the tree line before I even realized I was doing it. Old habits resurfaced, not as memories, but as instinct. And the strangest part was how natural it felt, as if my uncle's paranoia had seeped into the logs and was now part of me. Then came the night Atlas refused to sleep. He stood by the door, growling so low the floor seemed to vibrate beneath him. Luna whined and pressed against me, but her fur bristled along her spine, ears pinned back. I crept to the reinforced window and peered into the clearing. The moonlight spilled silver across the grass shadows, stretching long from the pines. At first, nothing moved. I waited, breath caught in my throat, the rifle tight against my shoulder. Then I saw it, a flicker, the faintest shadow at the edge of the tree line. Not animal. Too tall, too deliberate. And just as quickly it was gone. I stayed by that window until dawn painted the horizon, eyes burning, muscles locked. Whoever it had been never approached, but the message was clear. We weren't alone. Days after, I began to notice other signs. A branch snapped off higher than any deer could reach, the break clean, too clean. Stones stacked in ways nature wouldn't place them. Once near the creek, I found another print partial washed by rain, but again too large to belong to me, too precise to be dismissed. I crouched there, Atlas at my side, Luna pacing in restless circles, and I whispered aloud what I had already accepted. Someone's been here. Life in the cabin became a balance between building and bracing. I patched the roof-stocked firewood, set snares for small game, and tried to carve some rhythm into the days. But every hammer strike echoed like a signal, every fire I lit felt like a beacon. I couldn't escape the sense that eyes watched from the dark. And every night, when the forest held its breath, I found myself waiting, rifle across my knees, for the moment the silence would break. The strange thing was how the wilderness itself seemed complicit. Birds that once called at dawn now scattered without warning. The creek, once a steady lull, sometimes fell so quiet I swore the water stopped moving. Even the wind shifted, carrying with it a tension I had only felt in battlefields. Nature wasn't at ease here. It was alert, cautious, as though it too knew the shadows held something unnatural. Atlas adapted quickly, his soldier's patience matching mine. He stayed close, his growl sharper, his watchfulness constant. Luna grew more restless by the day, darting through the underbrush, barking at empty air, only to retreat with her tail stiff when she sensed something beyond her understanding. They balanced me, one steady, one restless, but both confirmed what I already felt. Peace here was only a mask stretched thin over danger. And so each day I worked, each night I watched, waiting for the moment when the shadows would finally step forward. Because deep down I knew what my uncle had known, what the tower itself seemed to declare in its silent stance: this land wasn't meant for rest, it was meant for vigilance. And the longer I stayed, the more certain I became. Whatever had haunted him still lingered here. And now it was watching me. It was Atlas who found it. For days I had been convincing myself that the unease in the clearing was nothing more than nerves, ghosts of old habits clinging to me in this wilderness. I stacked wood, mended the porch rail, walked the perimeter, told myself that routine would silence the fear. But one afternoon, while I was splitting logs near the edge of the cabin, Atlas began to dig at the base of the watchtower. At first, I ignored him, assuming he had caught the scent of a rabbit or vole. But his growl told me different. It was steady, deliberate, the same sound he'd made overseas when he sensed IEDs buried in the dirt. Luna circled close, her fur-bristled tail rigid. I dropped the axe and went to him. His paws had already scattered clumps of damp earth, revealing a corner of something metallic beneath the roots. I crouched, pushed him gently aside, and scraped with my hands, until the outline emerged: a green steel box, military issue, the kind used for ammunition. My pulse quickened. What was it doing here? Hidden beneath the tower's foundation. I fetched the small entrenching tool from the truck and worked carefully, dirt clinging beneath my nails as I freed it. When I pulled the box into the open, its weight surprised me. Heavier than empty ammo cans, but not impossibly so. It was wrapped in canvas, stained dark, with oil preserved against the years. Atlas sat at my side, ears forward, his gaze fixed on the box as if waiting for me to fail or succeed. Luna whined once, pawing at my leg, anxious. The latch was rusted shut. I pried at it with my knife, scraping away corrosion, until metal gave way with a groan. The lid popped open, the scent of oil and iron flooding out. Inside lay not ammunition, but two objects carefully wrapped in cloth. The first was a key forged from heavy steel, unlike any I had seen before. Its teeth weren't simple cuts, but a three-dimensional star, 6 points precise, machined with care. It was cold in my palm, heavier than it looked, the kind of artifact made for a lock that did not belong to ordinary life. The second was a disc of brass, palm-sized, its surface etched with delicate lines and dots. At first I thought it was decorative, but when I rubbed the tarnish away, the pattern revealed itself a constellation map. I didn't recognize the stars, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. Someone had made this with intent, as a guide, a code, or both. I sat back on my heels, the dirt cool beneath me, the key in one hand, and the disc in the other. My uncle had left these here. Not by accident. Not as trinkets. They were meant to be found. And they were meant for me. That night, after I bolted the steel bar across the cabin door, I laid the objects on the table beside the old leather-bound journal. I'd avoided opening the journal until now, afraid of what truths it might drag into the light. But with the key and disc before me, I could no longer turn away. The handwriting inside was small and neat, each letter drawn with the precision of a man who measured twice before cutting once. At first, the entries were harmless, notes on bird migrations, weather changes, patterns of deer, but as the pages turned, the tone shifted. Words like unnatural silence and lights without sound appeared. Mentions of trails too wide, paths too straight, movements at night that no animal could make. My uncle had been watching something. Something human, or something worse. Between the pages, I found a newspaper clipping folded and yellowed. The article was about a ranger unit returning home from Afghanistan, a grainy photo of weary soldiers stepping off a transport plane. My stomach clenched when I saw myself in the background, younger, harder eyes hollowed by dust and war. Beneath the clipping in my uncle's hand, a note. He does not know me, but I know him. I see the watchman in his eyes. He is the only one who will understand. I dropped the paper onto the table and stared at the journal. My throat tightened. He had been following me, tracking my career, perhaps even anticipating this moment. This inheritance wasn't random. It was chosen. He hadn't left me land. He had left me a post. The later entries were darker still. They have eyes and ears everywhere. To write plainly would be death. I have made a lock and a key. This is a test. Only a soldier can pass. My hands shook as I traced the words. A test. A key. The disc. My gaze slid toward the window where the silhouette of the Watchtower loomed against the star-dusted sky. The pull was undeniable. The answers were there. I gathered the lantern, the key, and the disc. Atlas whined low when I strapped on my old flashlight. Luna pacing nervously by the door. Stay. I told them, though my own voice betrayed the weight of the command. Atlas resisted, pressing his head against my hand, but at last he sank down, watching me with those eyes that knew more than words ever could. The ladder creaked under my boots as I climbed the tower. Each step carried me farther from the safety of the cabin, deeper into the purpose my uncle had carved for me. By the time I reached the top, the wind was stronger, rattling the walls of the small room that waited. Inside, dust coated everything, but the space was intact. A stool, a narrow slit of a window, and against the far wall, a military chest painted green, its surface scarred with years. I approached cautiously. No lock, no hinges, just a solid front panel. Then my eyes caught the carving on the wall beside the observation slit. The same constellation as on the brass disc etched with care into the wood. I held the disc against it. Perfect match. One of the carved stars was different. A plug of wood, cut separately, its grain running against the rest. Instinct guided me. I pressed it. A click sounded, and on the chest, a section of the panel slid aside, revealing a star-shaped keyhole. My hand closed around the steel key. It slid in with a weighty finality. When I turned it, the mechanism groaned like a rifle bolt, and the lid lifted an inch. My breath came slow, steady as I raised it open. Inside lay night vision binoculars, heavy and military-grade. A waterproof notebook filled with dates and cryptic notes. 2 trucks eastbound, no lights. 4 individuals, heavy cargo. Beneath that, a map of the forest, marked with routes and X's. And finally, a rifle oiled and pristine, nestled into custom-cut foam. I sank onto the stool, staring at the evidence laid out before me. My uncle hadn't been hiding from shadows. He had been gathering intelligence, watching convoys move under cover of night charting, smuggling routes through the mountains, preparing for a fight no one else even knew existed. In that moment, the truth landed with crushing weight. I hadn't inherited a cabin. I hadn't inherited land. I had inherited a mission. My uncle hadn't built a refuge, he had built an outpost. And now, by placing these keys in my hands, he had passed the watch to me. The disc, The key, the journal, the tower, they weren't puzzles for curiosity. They were proof. Proof that the war wasn't over. Proof that it had only moved here into these woods, into my life. I lifted the rifle, its balance familiar, deadly, and felt the old rhythm settle back into me. I wasn't retired. I wasn't free. I was on duty again. And as the cold night pressed against the watchtower walls, I whispered the truth that bound me. Now this inheritance wasn't peace. It was a call to arms. And I had answered. The moment I turned that key in the tower and lifted the lid of my uncle's chest, I knew the silence around us wouldn't last. Secrets don't stay buried forever. The forest had tolerated my presence while I stumbled through the routines of rebuilding, but the instant I touched his mission, I crossed a line. By nightfall, the enemy revealed itself. It began with Luna. She had been restless all day, circling the clearing, ears flat, tail stiff. Atlas stayed near the cabin door, his gaze locked on the tree line. The air itself felt different too, still as though the forest had stopped breathing again. I fed the lantern and loaded the rifle I had found in the chest, every motion automatic. My uncle had left it ready for me. He must have known this day would come. When the first sound came, a crunch of branches under deliberate boots, I didn't flinch. Atlas was already up, growling, his body taut as a drawn bow. Luna barked, sharp and frantic, her paws striking the floorboards like warning drums. Through the slit window I caught movement shadows shifting between the pines, too fluid to be animals, too practiced to be lost hikers. They were coming. I slid the steel bar into place across the cabin door and crouched, low, rifle tight in my hands. My pulse slowed the way it always did in combat, every beat heavy and deliberate. Outside voices murmured, faint but clear enough to confirm it, men, more than one, maybe 5 or 6. They had been watching, waiting for the right moment. And the moment I accepted the mission, they decided it was time to erase me. The first strike hit the windows. Glass that should have shattered, held firm, cracking but not giving way. My uncle's reinforcements bought me precious seconds. I dropped to a knee and returned fire through the slit, the recoil kicking against my shoulder. A figure staggered, fell, and the forest erupted with shouts. Bullets slapped against the cabin walls, thudding into the logs with violent percussion. Sparks showered as rounds glanced off steel brackets. Atlas lunged to the door, barking teeth bared his body a wall of defiance. Luna darted from window to window, her howls piercing as if she could split the dark with sound alone. They weren't just dogs, in that moment they were my unit, my brothers in arms. The fight dragged into the night, smoke from the rifle mixed with the thick scent of pine and gunpowder. I counted my shots, rationed them carefully, every squeeze of the trigger measured. They tried to rush, but the cabin was built for defense, each reinforced angle giving me cover. My uncle's design wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. He had left me a fortress, and now I understood why. At one point, the door shuddered under a heavy blow. Wood groaning, steel bar straining. Atlas threw his full weight against it, snarling with a fury I had never heard before. I dropped another attacker through the slit, the scream fading into the night as the forest swallowed him. The rest pulled back, regrouped. Silence pressed in again, thicker than before. I waited, rifle ready, ears straining. And then the fire started. A glass bottle shattered against the wall, flames licking hungrily at the logs. Another followed. Then another, the clearing alive with orange light. My heart hammered. The cabin wasn't meant to withstand fire. I shouted a guttural roar and charged the tower ladder. Atlas and Luna followed at my heels, unwilling to leave me. From the tower's height I rained down fire of my own, every shot driving them back into the shadows. The rifle was an extension of my will, and in the chaos I felt that old rhythm return, the terrible calm of battle. Eventually the forest quieted. The flames sputtered out where damp logs resisted the spread. The shadows withdrew their shouts, fading, leaving behind only bodies in the clearing and the acrid sting of smoke. My arms trembled from exhaustion, ears ringing, lungs raw. Atlas leaned against my leg, his fur damp with sweat and smoke, while Luna pressed against my side, her whimpers soft but steady. We had survived. But survival wasn't the same as victory. I knew this wasn't the end. They hadn't come for me by accident. They came because my uncle had been right. Because this land was never about peace. It was a front line disguised as inheritance. I looked out over the clearing, from the tower's height the moon casting its cold glow over the ruins of the fight. My uncle's words from the journal echoed in my head. Only a soldier can pass. He had known what was waiting. He had built this place as a shield. And now that shield was mine to carry. I wasn't a man escaping his past anymore. I wasn't here to heal. I was here to watch, to fight, to guard. The war I thought I left behind had found me again. And as Atlas and Luna settled at my side, I whispered the truth into the cold night air. I was the watchman now. And the fight had only just begun. From the moment I set foot in that clearing, I thought I had inherited nothing more than a forgotten patch of land and a crumbling cabin. But the truth revealed itself piece by piece. Reinforced walls disguised as homestead timber, a watchtower standing like a sentinel against shadows, journals filled with warnings, and a chest of weapons left not as relics but as orders. What seemed like peace was only the mask of war. And when the darkness finally struck, the illusion shattered. The cabin became a battlefield, the tower a fortress, and survival a duty. I came here hoping to leave the past behind, yet every sign reminded me that the fight had only shifted ground. My uncle hadn't left me land, he had left me a mission. He trusted that one day, someone would step into his place, carry the weight and keep watch, when others could not. And now, that burden rests on me. Atlas and Luna are more than my dogs, they are my soldiers, my family, my eyes in the dark. Together we have stepped into a war most people don't even know exists. But the truth is, this was only the beginning. The men who came that night weren't acting alone. Their footsteps, their coordination, their persistence, it all pointed to something bigger, something hidden deep within these mountains. What exactly are they guarding? What is worth killing for in this forgotten wilderness? That answer waits in the shadows of the Watchtower. If you've followed this story so far, tell me what you think waits beyond the tree line. Who or what do you believe Jonas Keene is truly fighting against? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who loves a mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the next chapter of this unfinished war unfolds.